Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Bradbury Group, New Zealand's best weekly political argument, hosted by the militant, Marxist, anti-Santa, Martyn Bradbury. The Bradbury Group is streamed live on Rover, Sky TV, YouTube and Facebook. Proudly sponsored by Watea, journalism you can trust. Let the arguments begin.
Kia ora Aotearoa. The true demarcation of power in a late-stage capitalism, liberal, progressive democracy is the 1% richest plus their 9% enablers versus the 90% rest of us. And once you see politics through that lens, the left can never lose an election again. Welcome to the Bradbury Group Election 26, New Zealand's best weekly political argument. I'm your host, the editor of the daily blog, Martyn Bradbury. Bomber to my comrades, Mr. Bradbury if you're nasty. My pronouns are us and we. Coming up on this evening's show, the political panel all-stars tonight are former High Commissioner and current podcaster Phil Goff, former Attorney General and current podcaster Chris Finlayson, and Māori working class anvil and current podcaster Matthew Tukaki. Tonight's 1-on-1 and 10 is the president of the mighty New Zealand Council of Trade Unions, Sandra Grey. Workers of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. Our extra 1-on-1 tonight is left-wing activist Sean Ackland on the polls, media bias, and what the left need to do to win this election. Shout out to Kiwi Skirt and Kiwi Bird for moderating tonight's YouTube page. Good evening to all the Bradbury Easters online watching right now. You make this show one of the most watched live podcasts in New Zealand, and your comments will appear on screen as we go. Shout out to our Watea, Facebook, Rover, Spotify, Apple Podcast and Sky TV whānau. Remember to like and subscribe because that's all that is holding the Fourth Estate together right now. And our Twitter panel this evening is Tim Selwyn. He'll be tweeting live online at Twitter, hashtag the Bradbury Group. Before all that, however, is this week's War on News. Brothers and sisters, it's day 150 of Trump's 3-week war that he's already won 17 times, and his illegal rampage has been paused because he's running out of ammo. That's so American. Trump is struggling to explain to the American people that he's going to have to surrender to Iran, which will be made far more difficult because he's told them 17 times he's already won. Iran never needed a nuke to protect themselves from America and Israel. They just needed to hold the Strait hostage and let oil prices do the rest. This is the worst geopolitical blunder since Vietnam, and Trump's too dumb to appreciate it, while we all collectively pay because he's a muppet. Trump has made Iran great again. Unbelievable. Talking of self-mutilation, Trashy Nashy gets the bashy for new mum fashy. Human ticking time bomb Stuart Nash predictably blew up his career last week after sending Chris Finlayson, of all people, a late-night text where he bashed new mum and National MP Katie Nimmin. To be fair to Nashy, most New Zealand First supporters love tradwives, so bashing a new mum for being lazy is very on brand for New Zealand First. But because Winston wasn't in the country and woke up with all the overnight messages of panic at Stuart Nash's latest kamikaze moment, Nashy faced grumpy morning Winston before his first shot of breakfast whiskey, and despite telling everyone 'twas but a flesh wound, ended his own career by letting Shane Jones take it around the woodpile and shoot it. Odds are now being taken on which other political circus freak in this cavalcade of ghouls does a Nashy and implodes next. Will it be love poet and former Conservative leader Colin Craig? Will it be Christo-fascist and recreational crossburner Elliot Aikili? Will it be anti-vax nanobot hunter Hapango Brownlee? Will it be Walking Handmaid's Tale prequel Alfred Naro? Or will it be Dancing with the Stars contestant and champion for non-binary mascara use Michael Laws? Who can honestly tell? Which New Zealand First candidate will explode next? It makes the election exciting. And finally, I appreciate we all want to give Paul Henry a kicking, but I'm old-fashioned and think you should bash someone for a good reason, not just recreationally. Last week, the Labour Party pronounced Paul Henry playing shoot, shag or marry amounted to a death threat. when Paul Henry said he'd shoot Chippy. What Labour should have said is, Chris prefers to be shot than have to marry or shag Paul Henry. But instead, Aisha went on ZB, which is never a good idea, and argued what Paul said amounted to a death threat. Now, I love Aisha, I do. She's awesome, she's great. But after we heard her singing, come on now, she shouldn't be judging creativity, like jokes, or songs, or music actually. I don't think po-faced humourlessness works against Paul Henry, and Aisha is one pearl clutch away from being an offended Karen demanding to speak to the manager. Again, love Aisha, but stretching what Paul said into a death threat would also have to include the person who asked it. Jeremy Wells. Hollow-cheeked private school rich boy Jeremy Wells, who co-hosts the most lightweight, banal current affairs program in history at the altar of beige mediocrity that is 7 Sharp, is Labour seriously suggesting that Jeremy Wells is part of a conspiracy to murder the leader of the opposition? Really? That would be the most political Jeremy has been in over 3 decades. Why the sudden alt-right radicalisation to conspire the assassination of the leader of the Labour Party? Is Jeremy listening to The Platform or Reality Check Radio 24/7? Is he following Andrew Tate's OnlyFans account? Am I taking a silly extreme position on something to manufacture offence? Good. I'm glad my point has been made. The political panel all-stars up shortly, whānau. But first, this week's 1 in 1 in 10 with mighty New Zealand Council of Trade Union President Sandra Grey. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show and thank you for being available to the Fourth Estate. Your democracy is grateful.
Look, we need to make sure we're having really decent conversations as often as we can, so really pleased to be with you, Bomber.
Comrade, I have been greatly impressed with your leadership of the NZCTU. I've had the opportunity to see you speak on numerous occasions, and I believe you are the kind of Helen Kelly-level union president Aotearoa needs right now. Welcome. I'm currently reading Comrade Bill Anderson, A Communist Working Class Life, right here. The biography of New Zealand's great union leader, and what is fascinating to me is how similar all the problems in the 1950s, 60s and 70s are with what we are experiencing now. The cost of living was too high. The cost of housing was too high. The workers were horribly underpaid and the Labour Party was insipid and spineless. Bill spends most of his time fighting the incremental Labour Party to do anything meaningful. Why are we endlessly repeating the same mistakes in New Zealand?
I mean, I think the thing is we need now to look at what 51 taught us about standing together and actually tackling these issues. And that's what 51 shows. The movement got very divided. We can't do that. Workers do need to be united in their push. And we need to be asking for what Bill and others asked for through the 50s and 60s, which is a fundamental change in our economy.
Yes.
And in our approach to unions. So we have been calling for that, both with Labour, but also with the Greens, with Te Pāti Māori. And of course, we're telling National and New Zealand First the same. It is time that workers were taken seriously. You are absolutely right. We see in New Zealand, 10% of New Zealanders holding 50% of the wealth, and rising child poverty, rising homelessness. Why? Why would anyone think the system is working for workers right now? And why wouldn't we stand up and say a whole new system is needed and we have the numbers to force that?
Preach. Here is a poem by a New Zealand truck driver in 1952 that appears in the book. A driver hasn't got a chance to live a life of ease. He seldom gets a second glance from those he tries to please. You drive and sweat from dawn to dark. Your work is never done. A driver's job is not a lark. There's never any fun. You haven't time to catch your breath. Noises drum in your brain. They work you nearly half to death. It really is a strain. Back to the depot and load there. The bearings are running hot. Back to the depot and load some more. Your smoko, it is not. That's from 1952, and the same stresses and the same demands and the same pressures are what workers face right now. When people say we can't risk transformative policy, that it's too radical. I feel like we have been trapped in an endless loop of history, and it's only by adopting transformative policy that we are ever going to break that cycle. Is the Green Party policy to automatically enrol people into unions a transformative move?
Look, it's absolutely transformative to say that unionism should be the norm for workers.
Yes.
The only way workers can have power is to collectivise. We've demonised working together.
Yes.
In New Zealand, and not just in New Zealand, but in the English-speaking world. Margaret Thatcher must be very pleased in the hot space that she's occupying, because she has convinced us that we're all individuals and we can, do things as individuals. We can't. We need to stand together. We need to stand by side. But also that poem reflects a narrative that's stuck with workers. I speak to a lot of working New Zealanders who go, I'm just grateful to have a job.
Right.
And I say, your employer should be grateful to have a good worker.
Yes.
Because the profits being made by the mega wealthy, by the multinationals, are earned off workers' backs, are earned off the truck drivers who drive through the night and don't get to spend time with their families. And we've got to start saying that much more loudly. New Zealand is reliant on workers turning up every day and giving it their all. It's not reliant on the mega wealthy who don't pay their fair share of tax and often don't care that they are taking human lives because of overwork and stress. So, we've just got to, as workers, stand up really proudly and say, we're the reason New Zealand works.
How does a union movement deal with a bad faith minister? Brooke Van Velden loves blood as much as your average great white shark, and her kneecapping of pay parity alongside her farcical desire to turn WorkSafe into an advisory body so that bosses aren't frightened highlights how bad faith she is. And this government's war on worker rights has been incredibly extreme. Does the union movement need to push back with the right to strike and universal unionism when you're facing bad faith actors like this?
We do need a fundamental change in the balance of power. We need an acknowledgement that government should be looking after workers' rights. And we've not got that. We don't have it from National. We don't have it from Act. But more importantly, we have Winston Peters as part of the government saying he believes workers deserve better and then voting against workers' interests. So, we actually need our politicians to stand up. Winston Peters does not have to vote with Act. He can actually say, for the good of the New Zealand people, I'm going to vote against these heinous pieces of legislation. So we have a real problem. The only way workers can do anything about this is, one, get enrolled, and we've seen the right trying to disenfranchise workers, because it is workers who will end up missing out with the changes to the legislation around enrolment. But two, talk to the people around you and actually go, hang on, how much worse off am I as a result of the economic decisions and a result of the Labour legislation decisions being made by this government? And, a third of food bank use is from working people.
That's outrageous.
That's how much worse off we are.
So outrageous. Many domestic workers are paid such a pittance, they eye up migrant workers with suspicion and fear that they are undermining pay and conditions. The political right exploit that fear into xenophobia. But if all migrant workers were universally enrolled into a union to ensure they aren't being exploited, domestic workers would know they weren't being undermined. When will we push for universal migrant unions?
Well, I think the part of that is that we have put forward fair pay agreements again as the way to make sure that we don't have this kind of race to the bottom, because the mega wealthy are saying the only way to make ends meet for us as the mega wealthy is to drive down wages. We have to stand together and say, we're not going to put up with that. No one should have their wages driven down for the profit motive. Actually, we all deserve decent pay, including migrant workers.
70 New Zealanders on average lose their lives at work every single year, and there's up to another 800 who are harmed and injured by the work environment they're living in. Do you believe any of the changes to WorkSafe, which I just think are bullshit, and can you honestly think that any of those changes that Brooke Van Velden wants to bring in will save one New Zealand life?
No, in fact, I hate to say it, but I think we're going to see more deaths as a result of this for a number of reasons. She's given a kind of get out of jail free card to small businesses, where we know there are a lot of accidents and
Absolutely.
a lot of lives lost. But also they've kind of downplayed psychosocial harm, and as well as the 70 who lose their lives as a direct result of accidents at work, around 70 New Zealanders die by suicide a year because of work pressures. So, we don't take this seriously in New Zealand, and this government, Brooke Van Velden, has given employers the red light to basically skate across the issue of workplace injuries. And I was reflecting today, as we talked about health and safety, we talk about changes over time and have things got better. My great-grandfather died in an industrial accident in 1909, I think. Some 120 years later, we've still got young men dying at work, young women dying at work, young non-binary members of our community dying at work. How on earth have we not made sure that people go home safe? This is just not good enough. And we should all be really outraged that it's our family members and our friends, our whānau, who are not coming home at the end of the day. And why? Because we have to make a little bit more money. That's all it's about.
Finally, comrade, unemployment is high and voters feel betrayed by a quality of life that has gone backwards. Why should Kiwis give a damn in this election and enrol to vote?
The only thing we can do is stand together and make sure we talk about the future we want for Aotearoa. And I do want to live in a New Zealand where children are not living in poverty. 1 in 7 children living in poverty is a disgrace for New Zealand. I want to live in a New Zealand where we respect the Taratio Waitangi. I want to live in a New Zealand where everybody gets a fair share, but also pays what they owe in terms of tax. And that is not the New Zealand we live in. But we can make it different, and I know we can. We absolutely can make a difference if everyone joins their union. There's a union premium, which means you'll get a little bit more money, but also you will stand with others who believe in a better life for all New Zealanders, and that is a really good thing to do. So we can. Workers, if they all took to the polls this year and all voted for parties that will actually put people and planet first, could make this election look very, very different from what the polls look like right now. Preach. It does not look good in the polls. And I am going to say, for all workers who are looking at New Zealand First and the promises that they will stand by workers, we need to remember that New Zealand First has voted every single one of the bills that is degrading your working life right now. Judge them on what they have done, not what they promised to do, because we actually need to hold National Act and New Zealand First for account for taking away money from workers, from taking away rights from workers, and from taking away the lives of workers by not taking health and safety seriously.
Thank you, Sandra, for your insight and your oversight. Join your union today, comrades. Thank you, comrade. We'll talk again soon.
Talk soon.
Hooray. The political panel all-stars up shortly, whānau. But now this week's extra 1-on-1 and 10 with left-wing activist Sean Ackland on the polls, media bias, and what the left need to do to win the 2026 election. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show and thank you for being available to the Fourth Estate. Your democracy is grateful.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Bomber. This is a bucket list moment for yours truly. I'm happy to be here. Long-time fan.
Sean, my little brother loves you and is constantly resharing your content, as are many, many, many others who engage with the criticisms of this government. As a left-wing online activist, how do you think the left are feeling going into this election?
I feel like a good way to describe it would be they are beaten but mobilized. They are an open rebellion of everything that this government has stood for. I feel like one positive that you could take away from this government is that they have really kind of made a generation of people and social media users a lot more civically engaged. For example, I had no idea what an ombudsman was before this election. I had no idea that we had a human rights commission prior to this government. So if there's ever one takeaway, if there's ever one positive that Christopher Luxon's government has given us, it is a more civically engaged voter base.
This government's meanness and gleeful ignorance are some of the most extreme I've ever seen. They strangle the common good for their donors' interests by using an anti-treaty, anti-Māori, anti-beneficiary, anti-worker, anti-disabled, anti-renter and anti-environment agenda. Yet, the polls are telling us this election will go down to the wire. If this government is so terrible, why haven't we won people back to the left, do you think?
I would almost disagree. I think if you look at the polling, if you were to have this election tomorrow, you would likely see another Luxon government come forward. However, Labour are consistently polling ahead of National.
Yes, they are.
Greens are really having a moment. We're not factoring in opportunity. And as much as firm as Winston Peters is in his position that he will never form a coalition with Labour, let's keep in mind that beside the election of 2017, Winston Peters has always gone with whoever wins. So let's not be too quick to rule him out. So I think, I don't think it's as dire as what the polls are suggesting for the left.
I think part of the issue is mainstream media framing. When Labour announced their public transport fare cap, there was weeks of hypercritical focus on the cost going up if it was a positive policy. Yet, ACT promised to cut half the entire government, while New Zealand First promised $1 billion corporate welfare cuddle for oil and gas, alongside stripping 700,000 permanent residents of their voting rights, and the mainstream media just ignore those policies. Does that bias impact voters?
I think it used to. I don't think it's sticking as much as it has in the past. I feel like the reason that you were seeing the likes of myself, the likes of Bree Elliott, who you had on last week, and Tanya Waikato kind of coming into the mainstream space would be because people have rejected the old mainstream, the old fourth estate, because of what I would say is a very clear, for as much hand-wringing as the right like to do about us having a left-wing media. I'm sorry, let's check the scorecard between the New Zealand Herald, between the Platform, between Duncan Garner, between News Talk ZB. Like, I'm sorry, what world are you living in? By the way, that's off the top of my head.
Yes.
So I completely reject this idea that the media has some kind of left bias. I'm like, citation needed, bro.
People who claim the New Zealand Herald is left wing, I just like, you must be Jim Greenan. I'm all about the math, and the simple truth right now, staring at those polls, is that the left is going to need top to get to 51%. Can the left activists accept that? And if they can't, where do we get those numbers to hit 51% without top?
The left activists, like myself, can absolutely accept top. I think top need to accept us. Because as much as top love to present themselves as a centre party, you can't tell me that there are going to be a lot of right-wing voters out there who would be in support of a land tax, who would be in support of a UBI. These are policy positions that are to the left of Labour. So why would Top ever think to position themselves as a centrist party when they are, I'm not going to go ahead and say that those policies are necessarily left-wing. I will say they appeal far more to left-wing voters than they do right-wing voters. So I'm growing really frustrated with Top and their kind of position that, we'll work with both sides. Christopher Luxon himself made it very clear. I think Christopher Luxon has a severe case of liabilities. The man is incapable of telling the truth. When he said yesterday that he is not going to form a coalition with Opportunity, I think that's the first time we heard him say the truth. I 1,000% believe that he would never form a coalition with Opportunity. And I think if you're a serious person within Opportunity, you would know that's true. So I want them to commit themselves to the left. And by the way, when they do, whatever votes or whatever support they think they're going to lose in disenfranchised national voters, they will more than make up for in the amount of left-wing voters who only thing keeping them from supporting Top is the fact that they're still committing to Luxon.
That's right. Finally, comrade, what do you think is at stake this election?
Everything. No, where do you want me to start? They've already taken away so much. Like, let's keep in mind, I want the audience to understand that 400,000 people voted within the window that this government has closed off for voting.
Yes.
Meaning that if they win by that margin, or a kind of a margin, and by the way, that 400,000 people, most of them definitely would have voted for the left-wing parties.
They do.
So
80% vote left.
So 80%, there you go. So if they win by that amount, I think there's a very strong case to be made.
But they've gerrymandered the election,
right? They effectively took this election.
Yeah.
That's one thing. Like, I think what we're looking at losing is asset sales. I think RNZ should be put on notice. And I would be feeling a little bit nervous if I was them. Yeah. I think we would see education, the charter school program.
Yes.
I think that's a Trojan horse to privatise our education sector.
Preach.
When I say everything, I'm not being hyperbolic.
Yeah.
When I say everything, I mean everything that makes us New Zealand, everything that we built this country from.
Thank you, Sean, for sharing your insight and your oversight this evening. Where can people follow you?
Most people know me from Facebook. I'm also on TikTok and Instagram. It's just Sean Ackland. Sean Ackland, author, if you're on Facebook.
All power to your arm, comrade. Good luck in your battles. We'll talk again soon.
Yoda, thank you.
Be well, my friend. Be well. Okay, now to our political panel all-stars. Our first panellist is the former leader of the Labour Party, former Auckland Mayor, former High Commissioner, current podcaster, ladies and gentlemen, high-ranking left-wing Jedi, Phil Goff. Kia ora, comrade. Right. Welcome to the show. One word to describe the week, please, sir.
Oh, the week so far. Just another week of Trump disruption, tariffs, ongoing war with Iran. We're all victims of that, including the American people. God, I'm counting down 2 years to go, although, of course, he was wearing that mega hat, make Iran go great again, and saying that he was going to run again against the Constitution. Well, you'd have to believe him, wouldn't you?
If our next panellist was a chess piece, he'd totes be the bishop, armed with a machine gun. Acerbic, brilliant, terrifying. These are just some of the words used to describe him. Former Attorney General and current podcaster, Chris Finlayson. Not on? We don't... Oh, we're waiting for Chris. We'll get him on shortly. And last but certainly not least, hurry up, Chris. And last but certainly not least, he's the Māori for all seasons. Working class anvil, broadcaster and raconteur, repeatedly mistaken by drunk Australians for a silver-haired Sean Fitzpatrick. It's not gambling when you have a system. Here's the uncle with the funkle, ladies and gentlemen. It's Matthew Tukaki. Kia ora,
Sorry,
comrade.
correction. It's Tane Randall.
Oh, Tane Randall. It was Tane Randall.
Yeah, it was Tane Randall.
Tane Randall.
They got me a
mistake
night
you
of
for.
free booze in a Sydney pub.
Oh my lord! And was it worth it?
Well,
was that deceit worth it?
I didn't correct them. I was signing autographs. Had a great night out with a whole lot of drunk Kiwis.
One word to describe the week.
Opportunity.
Yes.
I do think that we now have a game on the left. I think it was incredibly silly for Christopher Luxon to rule them out. I think probably he should have spoken to his senior ministers, in particular Erica Stanford and Chris Bishop, who seemed to have maybe a different view. Certainly that's what they said on the tiles of Parliament in the last 24 hours. But the cautionary tale here is this is not an election in my mind on either the left or the right. This is going to be one in the sensible centre. Now, take from that what you will, but everything that I'm watching, listening and reading to across the media sphere, or whatever you want to call it, is simply that New Zealanders were tired after COVID. They were exhausted. They were looking for a little bit of stability, a little bit of ease, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Instead, they got a government who was doing all sorts of things really, really quickly, and a lot of things that they didn't bank on. And so even though there were different sorts of things, New Zealanders are tired. You know, they just want to know that they're going to have a job. They just want to know that they can put food on the table, all the basics, and that if they turn up to hospital, that they're not going to be red carded because there's nothing available for them in ED. So opportunity knocks. I think Christopher Luxon didn't take the call.
Yep.
And mind you, to be frank, it's not going to be his call. He can roll them out as much as he wants. It's not his call. He's not Winston Peters.
Now we also have Chris Finlayson joining us. Kia ora, Chris.
Sorry, I'm a little late. I do apologise, oh great one.
You are fantastic, and we are so glad that you are here. One word to describe the week, please, sir.
One what?
One word to describe the week.
Interesting.
Interesting. Brothers and sisters, let's get into tonight's show. Issue 1, New Zealand first post-Nash, winners, losers and predictions. Issue 2, economist Cameron Baggery spells out doom ahead for New Zealand. And issue 3 tonight, national rule-out top, so what happens next? Plus we'll have a final word at the end of the show where each panellist gets to go to the mountaintop to see who breaches broadcasting standards this week. My money is on Phil if we mention Trump. Let's kick things off with issue 1. Only a teenage goth can self-mutilate themselves more than Stuart Nash. Does an electorate as polarised as this one care if candidates are malicious, or is it all froth for the result? Phil, there are deeply problematic candidates promoting deeply problematic policy in a landscape directed by social media hate algorithms. Isn't that just the new reality of politics?
Yeah, I think Chris Hipkins got it right when he said it shouldn't be called New Zealand First, it should be called Labour's Seconds. He could have said Labour and National Seconds. I thought Andrea Vance had the best line about the zombies walking towards trying to pick up their disappointed and lost political careers with New Zealand First. But look, if we look at Stuart Nash, and look, I like Stuart as a person.
You do. We've all had a beer with him. We've all had
I've worked with him for a long time.
But
the serious lack of judgment. Look, he got sacked out of cabinet for serious lack of judgment. Here he is leaking cabinet documents to commercial property developers about commercial matters.
Who are donor mates?
And then naming people who said such and such around the cabinet table.
Yeah.
And then he was surprised that he got kicked out of cabinet. Well, that was poor judgment. He was asked to describe a woman. I'm not going to repeat what he said. But that was right
Crazy.
out. And then he decided on the back of our podcast with Chris and I to text Chris, who hasn't talked to him for 6 years, but he thinks he's a mate.
Yes.
And tell them that this national candidate, the MP that he's against, took far too much time off when she was on maternity leave. And then, look, you'd wonder, and Heather Duplessis-Allen raised this, it looks like, that Peters did something that might upset his woke base. But the fact of the matter is, New Zealand First is meant to stand for family values, and who denies a person the right to take maternity leave to have a baby? Because for God's sake, we need more babies. Otherwise, Matthew and I and Chris aren't going to get our superannuation, and you too, Bomber.
Follow-up question, Phil. Jim Bolger was often asked why he didn't direct National into a more anti-Māori perspective. And he said, I could have done that, but how would I govern? You have 3 political parties open in their contempt towards the treaty and Māori political aspiration now, with some very extreme policies promoted. How does the left respond?
Yeah, well, look, I think Bolger had a genuine commitment to a better New Zealand.
A decent society.
He talked about a decent society. Then he made Ruth Richardson Minister of Finance, and we had the mother of all budgets, which robbed superannuitants and beneficiaries and working people of a decent income. But look, Bolger, the saving grace for Bolger was that he is Irish. He's his Irish ancestry, and he knows from his own people's oppression through their history to be able to identify with other people who have been similarly oppressed by exactly the same thing, English colonists. So Bolger, and I think Bolger had a decency about him, and he had Doug Graham there.
Yeah.
I mean, Doug Graham, I gave Doug Graham a really hard time in the House. I keep thinking I should ring him up, because he is still alive, and say, Doug, no matter the hard time I gave you in Parliament over how you handle justice issues, what you did showed great courage in regard to treaty settlements. And and then that was continued, of course, by people like Mike Cullen and by Chris Finlayson. And what we all knew was you only got to look at Northern Ireland. You go to a place where they've held a grudge for 150 years or longer. Going back to the potato famine, and they'd never confronted the injustices that happened and never sought to resolve it. Well, we don't want that for New Zealand. We want a better future where people of different races live side by side, where we accept the place of Maori people as the first settlers of this country, the tangata whenua, and we're proud of that part of our ancestry as much as we are proud of the part of our ancestry from, in my case, from England, Scotland and Ireland.
Yeah. Chris, libertarian philosopher Damien Grant has said your release of a private message was worse than what was revealed. How will you sleep tonight knowing that one of the greatest libertarian warrior poet kings stands against what you have done?
Well, I thought his analysis was superficial, as it so often is, and he went straight to the proposition that it was a private communication. And so he should have, if I'd been Damien Grant, instead of fulminating like that, I would have said, well, first, what was the relationship between Finlayson and Nash?
Yes.
And the answer was non-existent.
Right.
The last time I communicated with Nash, and I remember it, Phil, very well, it was the day of the Christchurch massacre, and I had a question, Matt, for Nash on behalf of Mana Ahuriri.
Yeah.
And he said, can't respond, incident in Christchurch. That was the last time I spoke to him. When was that? 2019? 2019. And so, and I don't say this in a, Heather Duplessis, Alan says I'm a bitch, but I would say this, that, and I don't mean it in any sort of tart way, Stuart's no friend of mine. He's just not a friend.
Yeah.
So Annette King is a friend of mine.
Sure.
And Winnie Laban, they were my opponents who used to wallop me in those seats, and we were good buddies, but that's friendship. And the other thing is that, look at the this is what Grant should have done. What were the circumstances of the text? Totally unsolicited, out of the blue.
Yes.
No, dear Chris, how are you? Long time no see. Just thought I ought to clear up a few things. There was no personal thing. It was straight into this rather unfortunate attack on Katie Nimmin.
Yeah.
So my answer to Damien Grant is apply a little professionalism. Don't jump to the adjective private before you have actually made a few inquiries. So was I upset about that? Upset in the sense of, being savaged by a flea. So the answer is no.
Follow-up question. You know how bad this has been for New Zealand First when Chris Luxon comes out of it looking tough, even though he ruled Stewart out after the rumours Nash was standing down were circulating. This has been a rare week of strength from the Prime Minister, hasn't it?
Well, I think any half-sentient person would say, I'm sorry, those comments were about my colleague, whom I value and esteem, were unacceptable. And it was across the Parliament. Everyone was kind of revolted by what had been said. So was I surprised at the reaction? I guess genuinely I was a little surprised, and I was surprised that Peters was very firm and said, no, sorry, door's shut.
Yeah, but let's look at the hypocrisy of this as
Please.
well.
Yeah,
Nash showed poor judgment and he paid the price for that.
Yes.
What about the other character who the same week used the same poor judgment about knee pads? Talking about the Prime Minister meeting Modi and he should take off the knee pads. Now, he said he was talking about health or sport and avoiding
come
injury.
on,
And everybody
come
knows that
on.
that's bullshit.
Everybody
knows that that's bullshit. That was
just a reminder, I think using the word sentient in the same conversation as the two gentlemen that are being discussed this evening is the wrong word.
Yeah, so we've got on one hand, Nash gets his comeuppance because he's still living in a 1950s world about the place of women, but Jones gets away time and again with stuff that's just plain racist, talking about Indian tsunamis. He knows what he's doing, and he even admitted it. He said, "Oh, look, I use hyperbole to get my point across." You mean he lies to get his point across, and he winds up people who actually believe that racist nonsense. And he gets away scot-free.
Yeah, he does.
So it's no longer possible to be sexist and misogynist, apparently, according to New Zealand First, but you can still be racist.
Yeah, they're still being racist.
Phil, how many times have I told you it is not Shane Jones, it's the Matua?
Oh, of course, the Matua. The only person, other than the king, I know that speaks in the third person about himself.
Can I ask you a question? Have you ever come across any rangatira who's started to refer themselves in the third person as the Matua?
No, never.
It's an interesting rhetorical device, but it's very odd.
He refers to himself third time he refers to himself so many times third person that he's become three-dimensional. Matthew, do we want solutions? Do we want solutions, or do we want to fight the selection? Because those candidates that New Zealand First have selected suggest voters want a culture war, don't they?
No, I think New Zealand First are playing to populism, and that's what they do. It's what One Nation's doing in Australia. It's what Nigel Farage is doing in the UK. So they're following a playbook here. So all that aside, I think what's really sad about what's happened in the last 3 years in terms of Te Ao Māori is the unbundling of a lot of really good work from a lot of really good people, including from national.
Across the spectrum.
That's right. Doug Graham, Doug Kidd, all sorts of people from National and Labour. By the way, unknown fact maybe Doug Graham's middle name was
Montrose.
Montrose,
yeah. Lord Montrose, we used to call him at the house.
No, but I mean, you've had a really good lot of work in partnership with no argument necessarily, but good, strong, honest debate. And today we've got an unbundling of that in a way that's going to set not only race relations back quite a trick, but actually it's causing division in of it. So it's not Māori that are causing the division out there.
No.
It's these populist parties who are playing by a playbook.
If we were honest, Nashi getting the bashy isn't going to hurt New Zealand First vote, is it?
Well, look,
because if you're into New Zealand First now, that's not going to stop you.
Look, I mean, have a look at the candidates that have hustled up to the New Zealand First wagon. You've got David Samuels and you've got Reno Tirakata there. Fetu will be rolling in her grave.
Absolutely.
But then again, I reflect on the 96-93 playbook of New Zealand First when they took the Māori electorates, when it was just Northern, Eastern, Southern and Western Māori. And I can see...
That went well, didn't it?
Well, yeah, dirty dog sunglasses, remember that little iteration. But I mean, I think nothing surprises me with that party.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think that they've got too much growth to go in terms of they've probably reached their...
You think they've peaked?
I think they've peaked. I think the problem is that there's only so many votes National can bleed before, because they're now probably going to bleed some to the Opportunities Party as well.
Yeah.
And so I just think probably, we've got to look at that sensible centre once more, I think.
Quick round. Winston Peters hilariously said Luxon, he actually said this, would rue the day for selecting Nashi as a candidate. Who is ruining what now? Phil.
Yeah, well, it's...
who's ruining it?
You'd have to... I think actually New Zealand First did take a bit of a hit. People don't like waka jumpers, basically. They don't like party hoppers. They did a poll on this way back in the day, and it said 70% of people just didn't like that. You go into politics with a set of values, and they're not tradable. You can't say, if you don't like these values, can I offer you a different set of values? And that's what Stuart Nash did. Basically, this bullshit about Labour is no longer the party of Savage and Fraser, as if New Zealand First was. As if New Zealand First was. You know, Savage and Fraser and Nash.
The greats.
Those great leaders stood for anything but what New Zealand First claims to stand for, which is about ethnocentrism. It's about finding scapegoats. Savage talked about applied Christianity, treating people like you would have them treat you.
Not defining what a woman is.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
That
And
nuttiness.
as Matthew said before, the whole trade of New Zealand First is finding ways to divide New Zealanders and to scapegoat New Zealanders. Now, look, I don't draw too much in the way of comparisons with fascism, but basically, that's what the fascists did.
Right.
You know,
Right. Blame the other.
blame the homosexuals, blame
Yes.
the trade unionists,
Yes.
blame the communists,
Yes.
divide your country,
Yes.
and then say one group of people are purer and Aryan and all the rest of it. That is dangerous politics. New Zealand First is dabbling on the edges of it, but they are the party of Pauline Hanson. They are the party of Nigel Farage and of Donald Trump.
Yes.
You know, I keep hearing Peters complaining about people like Modi. I've never heard him say a word against Trump. Not one word. Even when Trump said that our soldiers didn't have the courage to fight on the front line, Peters was silent. I was so bloody angry about that because we lost 10 New Zealanders and they were fighting on the front line. Willie Appiata, when he got his VC, was fighting 100 kilometres behind the front line in enemy territory. And this prick who avoided the draft 5 times comes along and reflects on the courage of our soldiers, the British soldiers and the other NATO soldiers that were there. That was disgusting, and Winston Peters was silent.
Yes. Chris Finlayson, has Winston rued the day that he selected Nash yet?
Well, I think he must be looking back and saying to himself, are these retreads good for the party? Now, I don't want to dwell on Stewart. He's taken his punishment, and so let's leave Stewart. And frankly, I wish him all the best for the future because the guy's got to make some money and he's got a family and so on. But you look at people like the person who took over from Chester Burrows and Wanganui, Hareti Hipango Brownlee, she calls herself now.
Yeah.
She was never really of the National Party and didn't do particularly well. Alfred Naro had his limitations as a minister, and I think was very disappointed when he got turfed out in 2020 and his Jesus party didn't do so well in 2023.
0.5% of the vote.
Praise the Lord.
Right. And so
Colin Craig as well.
I would have said, look, I don't think this is the kind of team that's going to do it for us, but he's kind of stuck with them now. I must say, Rino Tirakatni is a very nice guy.
Yes,
and
he
comes from Labour Party royalty, and I like I never had a bad word for him in Parliament. I just regret his going over there. He's not standing for them, so why did he expose himself to criticism?
It was
very
weird.
strange.
What about Michael Laws, though, Chris? So you haven't mentioned anything. You must know Michael.
Well, I'm very conscious of the laws of defamation.
You want to get yourself a good KC to protect you.
Enough said. Comrades,
I really, I do. His father, as I said on the great podcast a few weeks ago, threatened to sue me for defamation at the AGM of the National Council of Debating Unions. You think that you'd have tough fights in the CTU and in the unions. It was nothing compared to the National Council of Debating Unions, and so I got very hot there. So I think I'll leave it there.
Fair enough.
Michael's an interesting fellow, but I don't wish to be on the receiving end of a writ.
Great Dancing with the Stars candidate. Comrades, we need to move on to issue 2 tonight, and that is economist Cameron Baggery spelling out doom ahead for New Zealand. Normally, our economists, business journalists and commentators are all cheerleading the animal spirits of free market capitalism, but Cameron has bucked that trend and written a damning indictment of where he thinks the New Zealand economy is headed and the massive headwinds coming our way. His 3 main points are: the Middle East is a subset of the bigger geopolitical and geostrategic picture. The shift from the Great Moderation to the Great Transition and populism as angst drives political blowback. Chris, Trump has ushered back in might is right and tossed the rules-based order. How does New Zealand navigate that, do you think?
I think we're doing pretty well in terms of dealing with Trump at the moment. Keep our heads down, avoid rising to the challenge of inane comments from that very sad fellow, the Secretary of War. I mean, what a dork. And basically just pray like hell that come 20 January 2029, we'll get back to normalcy. But it certainly has been a very disruptive period. Look, I've got a lot of respect for Cameron, but it is a little bit negative, frankly. Yeah, we're all facing these challenges, but we're a plucky little country with lots of talented people, and I actually think we can come through it.
Matthew, Cameron is baking in a level of inflation from Hormuz that must impact the New Zealand economic direction. National didn't want a crisis, but they've got one now, haven't they?
Look, in the words of the great Bill Lodey, who was a naturist up until his death on the goodies,
yes,
he once said, look, as I walk down the hedgerows, I can hear the silence of the birds. The point I'm trying to make is that there's a bit of silence going on at the moment about the strength of the New Zealand economy. I would, though, argue we are at the behest of the global economy. We'd be kidding ourselves if we weren't. But when you really reflect on what's going on in New Zealand, we're a lot more structured and have a lot more insulation around us than a lot of other countries do, including Australia, by the way. Does it satisfy our need to want to go to hospital and get the operation when we want to, or fight back about the new national curriculum, all these things? No. But I think wheels have been set in motion. There are some things you can control and others you cannot. And we cannot control what is going on within the global economy at the moment.
Phil, China has just announced one of its slowest growth rates in a decade at 4.3%. Does this highlight the need for the free trade deal with India?
We'd be brokenhearted, wouldn't we, if we got 4.3% growth? That's higher than we've had for years.
Right.
Look, I think you need to go with the free trade agreement. It's not perfect. It's not a patch on what I think I achieved with China, but the circumstances are different. I'm not blaming Todd McClay on that.
Perfect, right? No.
But you've got to say the China one was next to perfect because it covered all goods, including dairy.
Right.
And of course, what we've done with India is we've excluded 30% of New Zealand's exports in one area, and we don't take the price, the tariffs off everything. But look at what Trump did with those tariffs that he brought in. Just arbitrarily, hopefully overturned by the Supreme Court again. But you can't totally rely on that. But you take a product like wine. We send $740 million worth of wine to the United States each year. It's by far our biggest market. Yeah. Wine is a discretionary product. So if the price goes up 12.5%, the consumer looking at the shelves in Los Angeles or New York will look at it and say, maybe I'll buy Napa Valley Sauvignon Blanc, even though I know New Zealand is better, because the price differential is there. So we need to look. The United States is no longer a reliable trading or diplomatic partner. That's the truth of it. Under the Trump administration, I hope that changes, as Chris said, after January 29. But you need that free trade agreement with India because it breaks into what's going to be the third biggest economy in the world. Yeah. And this is what, I remember Peters opposed the free trade agreement with China.
Right. That's right.
They made claims about it that this was a bad deal. Our deficit with the trade with China will go up. It didn't. It reversed and was in our favour.
Yes.
And of course, but the person, interestingly, that moved the free trade agreement bill on my behalf, because I was in China leading a trade mission, was one Shane Jones. Yeah. And so
the Matua. Comrades, we need to move on to issue 3 tonight, and that is Chris Luxon's weird rush to rule out working with Top. Matthew, so Labour, Green, Te Pāti Māori, Top government, is it then?
Look, I think it takes a lot to breach that 5% threshold. I'm not certain. I wasn't certain before Luxon ruled them out that they would make it.
Yep.
Any advice I would be willing to give to the Top party would be to stay on the neutral bench as much as you can,
Yep.
so you can learn about what it takes to be in the parliament, let alone in
Yep.
government. That would be my view.
Phil?
But hang on.
Yeah.
But on the Mātua,
Yes.
I can see a picture forming of a seagull on a beach looking for a hot chip. Now, the seagull knows not to eat the hot chip because it will burn its throat, but I can hear it saying Mātua, 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 and eating the chip.
Phil, can Labor work with Top?
I think they can. I want to take the moment to disagree with your person at the start of the program, Sean, because he was saying, "Oh no, the Opportunities Party should come out and be left wing." If they do that, all they do is divide up the vote on the left. And as Matthew said before, the name of the game to win this election is to pull some of those centrist voters across. So look, make no mistake, this is why Luxon has done what he's done. He is worried about bleeding to the Opportunity Party. So he's damning them.
Yeah.
He's damning them as, oh, look, they're a high tax party. Look, I think their land tax, I looked at what the average person with $1 million property would pay, and it's about $17,500 a year just in land tax. Yeah. That's a big new tax to put on anybody. So I'm not convinced that that's the right way to go yet. I mean, give it a chance, have a look at it, see if there's only a small handful of countries and states operating it. But the Opportunities Party needs to go for that centrist vote. And we want them. At the moment, they're bleeding about 23% from National and 18% from Labor. Yeah. If Luxon can brand them as being left-wing, then they'll bleed more from Labor and the Greens, and they won't take from National. Yeah. So this is a political ploy. So what we've got to do, Opportunities Party, I think, has handled it reasonably well. They've said, look, we'll talk. We don't care what Luxon said. Believe me, if it relies on the Opportunities Party to get them across the line, Luxon will be in their rooms as quickly as you can imagine.
Chris, is that true? What do you think?
Well, I'm probably a very bad person to talk about these predictions because in my valedictory speech in 2018, I said that I thought New Zealand was turning back into a two-party state. Well, that was wrong. I remember seeing Karen McAnulty in the street and putting that proposition to him. He said, oh, no, with the development of MMP, you're probably going to see more political parties, and he was absolutely right. But I certainly, my hope, I like some of the top people. Jessica Hammond, who's standing in Wellington North's a very good person. Yep. But my hope is we just don't need any more political parties in the House. I agree with Matt. I think 5% is a tall order. There have been some who have come very close in the past, but not quite got there. My feeling is they'll just miss out. And so if there's to be, I think it'll be the old Labour Greens versus National Act in New Zealand First, because I don't, Matt would be in a far better position than I am to judge, but I just don't know that apart from the Waikato Tainui seat, Matt, I would think all the Māori Party people are skating on thin ice.
Comrades, we need to wrap the show with a final word. Matthew Tukaki, your final word this week, please, sir.
Look, flatulence is my final word. I'm never shocked or surprised by the state of Australian politics. And then I look across here to little Aotearoa, New Zealand, and I see a gaggle of geese in a paddock walking across cow shit. And what I mean by that is you've got a gaggle of old politicians who should know better, and yet they've metamorphosised themselves in a second life sort of with New Zealand First. I think it's sad. I think New Zealanders are looking for stability. They're looking for that sensible centre. And they're not going to find it, sadly, at this election unless something materially changes.
Phil, your final word?
Yeah, well, we're 3 months out from an election now, but it's much less than that when it comes to when you have to be on the roll to vote.
Yes.
And the electoral amendment bill that went through Parliament was designed to disenfranchise the 100,000 people that enrolled in the last 2 weeks and on election day itself. Yeah. The government has changed that for no good reason. Won't hurry up the counting of the vote at all. They've done it for no good reason. They've done it for a bad reason, which is to disenfranchise people, particularly flatters that move from address to address and maybe aren't on the roll or for whatever reason. make sure, for all of you people listening to this show, make sure you are on the roll, because if you're not on the roll, your vote won't count. And in a democracy, your vote is worth the same as every other individual's vote. You need to vote. You need to vote left of centre. Preferably you vote for the Labour Party. But yeah, to do that, you've got to be on the roll. Please make sure you get enrolled.
Preach. Chris, your final word this week, please, sir.
Optimism. I think this is a great country. I'm fond of saying other countries have problems. We have a project. We're better than what we're experiencing at the moment with all this negative, nasty stuff. I love the South Asian community, for example, and what they're doing for our country. I think of the nurses who look after mum. I don't like good people being bagged, and I think we've got to rise above it, because I think we as a people are better than this.
Preach. Thank you, Chris. That's such great words. Thank you, comrades. Now to my final word. Brothers and sisters, I appreciate everyone is very busy and stretched right now. We have enormous problems erupting left, right and centre, with 51% of Māori households living with food insecurity, 860,000 Kiwis living in relative poverty, and the strongest El Nino in 150 years about to peak over New Zealand. I appreciate all those things. But if we have time for Trashy Nashy and who Paul Henry would shoot, marry and shag, then damn it, we should have time for this issue I'd like to bring to everyone's attention. No New Zealand media seem to have picked this story up, and it feels wrong that I'm the one left to put this, but this week, The Guardian, as part of their investigative series into undercover spies living with, sleeping with, and having false relationships with women in the UK, revealed a weird connection to New Zealand in a bizarre way that does kind of require someone ask some questions in the mainstream media about the New Zealand police secretly spying on one of the great whistleblower activists of the 20th century. According to The Guardian, released this week, that famous whistleblower McLibel activist Helen Steele was subject to one of those British fake relationships, and she attempted to track him down in New Zealand after he disappeared. The British Secret Intelligence Service asked the New Zealand police to secretly spy on Helen Steele when she visited New Zealand in December 2002. Helen Steele is one half of the infamous McLibel court case from the 1990s that destroyed McDonald's brand like no other event beforehand. She was an incredibly well-known activist against corporate power. She was tricked and betrayed into a relationship with a British spy, and then when she went searching for him in New Zealand, our police secretly spied on her. See, I kind of think spying on legitimate dissidents for our British overlords seems a tad bootsucky to me. Shouldn't someone ask something? Because that seems pretty vile in terms of her mana. Helen Steele is one of the great activists. She deserved way better than that, especially when a Labour, Progressives, United and Green government was in power at the time. Some questions need to be asked. In solidarity, the revolution continues. Ka pai Aotearoa.
The Bradbury Group, New Zealand's best weekly political argument. The Bradbury Group is an independent podcast through the Rover Network, sponsored by Wātea News. Everything on the show is an opinion and shouldn't be taken seriously enough to attempt defamation action against us. We were joking. We're never serious about anything. And officially, a small weta in Avondale is legally the owner. Good luck finding him. Don't forget to follow, like and comment.